Let us pray. Father God, I thank you that we're able to come together, and worship, but also share in fellowship and learn new things, gather new ideas, learn from one another, and also support one another. So I pray, Lord, that this session this afternoon, it's in your hands. Please lead us. Please help us to ask the questions. Please help us to accept things that we need to do in our lives as a result of what we heard today. So I pray, Lord, that you, as we continue, that you bless us and keep us all alert. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Right, I'm going to hand over to Richard and Michael. Thank you.
Well, Michael, first of all, I want to say welcome. I mean, some people will know you from your time at Synod, and I guess you may say a little bit more about yourself during the course of this interview. We were joking just before we started about that passage where Jesus talks about there being many rooms in his Father's house, and whether it ought to be kind of retranslated as there are many Zooms in my Father's house. Just kind of conscious, actually, of people sitting in rooms all over the Northeast, and you over in Manchester, and it's great to be able to be together with you. First question, though, is I wonder what you've noticed about the church's response in the first few weeks of the lockdown.
Richard, thank you. Thanks for that question, and thank you all for kind of coming this afternoon. Time is really, really important, and so thank you for giving your time. Well, what I noticed was the church was a little bit like a chicken with its head cut off. You know, kind of it was really kind of interesting in those first few weeks where all of a sudden we couldn't meet physically, but we basically kind of had a panic mode on, where we had to try and get our online acts of worship up and running as quickly as we possibly can. Followed by kind of making sure pastorally we look after everybody. You know, there seemed to be a real concentration on the acts of worship, and then secondly, pastoral, right in the middle of a massive kind of stress test for the church. I think it always kind of shows where our focus is. So I kind of noticed, you know, that there was a real inward-looking thing going on in those first few weeks of lockdown, Richard.
Has there been anything that's encouraged you during the lockdown?
Yeah, I mean, I think Christianity has come roaring back during the lockdown, but I don't think it's kind of come roaring back via the church. I don't know if you noticed, like I did, that the government suddenly announced that we need responders in our communities. And so they were hoping for 250,000 people to come forward as responders. Well, in fact, of course, 750,000 came forward. And what was the program called? The Good Sam program. The Good Sam program. That sounds faintly familiar. I'm not quite sure where that comes from. I think it's the Beano or something like that, I think. And then children and parents have to do homeschooling together. And all of a sudden, rainbows start appearing in windows. Rainbows. That's quite familiar as well. And then on a Thursday evening tonight, we will come out as a nation at 8 p.m. and we will clap for those who we now know are literally putting their life on the line for a stranger. Life on the line for a stranger also sounds quite kind of familiar. Blooming heck, everybody. Christianity has come roaring back, and whisper it, everybody. God is not in lockdown. God is not in lockdown. God hasn't even been furloughed. It's a shocker, isn't it? It's an absolute shocker. But a bit like, you know, when those disciples were locked in that room, you know, kind of, and doubting Thomas was basically kind of saying, I'm only going to believe unless I kind of see the wounds in his hands. And of course, Jesus appears in a house which is locked. And I think kind of Jesus is appearing in many houses at this moment in time. So I am really fascinated with what appears to be happening. I think God has dispersed the church into neighborhood, into community. We can't physically meet any longer. And we're now in neighborhood. We're now in our neighborhoods. It's really difficult to love your neighbor if you don't actually know your neighbor's name. And all of a sudden, we're going back to early church times, when essentially kind of, you know, we're chatting to our neighbors. Shock, horror. You know, we're discovering the names of our neighbors that we might have lived next to for 10, 15, 20 years. I think God is all over this. I mean, it's a horrible situation. Nobody would say otherwise. It's horrible. You know, and some people say maybe there's a silver lining. I don't think there's a silver lining. I think there's a golden opportunity, Richard.
I guess, Michael, I've been kind of noticing kind of grace of God in my neighbours, just in really kind of small things, which have been really encouraging and heartening. So, for example, there were some children around the corner who a few weeks ago painted stones, rainbows on stones, and went and delivered them to houses in the neighbourhood and just put them on garden walls, saying, I hope this makes you smile. And we've been going out every Thursday night, like a lot of people, and actually now with pots and pans, just kind of clanging on the pans, and people that we've never met before, we now wave to from across the street. So there's all sorts of things that are going on. We also, I don't know if I should say this as a Methodist minister, we started a happy hour over our garden fence with our next door neighbours once a week. It's a really good way of building fellowship. So I'm spotting a lot of things in our neighbours. I just wonder what opportunities you see for local churches as we emerge from the lockdown.
Well, that's a really interesting concept, isn't it? Kind of happy hour and Methodism. That's an idea that is time has come, hasn't it? Really, that is a corking idea from a district chair. Everybody, oh, let's rejoice! There's going to be happiness in Methodism. Anyway, no, there mustn't be any comedy in this at all. Yeah, I mean, I think there is an amazing opportunity for the church, because I think we're rediscovering another aspect of church which we've lost. You know, it's not anything new. It's almost re-remembering, you know, this idea that church may well be where two are gathered in my name. You know, I'm there in the midst. You know, and you know, just the idea that Richard just floated there, you know, that, you know, kind of having a drink, you know, with our neighbours, and, you know, building community, you know, building relationship. You know, I think we've ghettoized ourselves. You know, we've looked too much internal and we've not gone external. And I think, you know, this is what this opportunity has given to us, is the opportunity to actually look externally. And so I think for us as a church, we need to be thinking about a near vision and a far vision. So let me just concentrate on the far vision to start off with. We got to think there's going to be a glorious day when we're going to come out of lockdown. And I don't just mean those of us who can come out of lockdown right now, but the glorious day when those we are shielding will come out of lockdown. I mean, folks, what a day that is going to be. You know, when, you know, those we are shielding have come out of lockdown. It's going to be a glorious day. And we, with any responsibility, leadership responsibility in the church, need to think of that day, think of that week. because I believe that church can and should be at the centre of community again. I think it's almost as if we've gone back to 1950s Britain, where there's no cars, you know, and where church was more at the centre of community. So what would we do on that glorious day, on that glorious week, when our shielded are actually released, you know, kind of for the first time in a long time, when we can physically meet again as churches? Well, I can just imagine those services, and I do mean plural there, services, because I don't think we're going back with the same numbers we left with. I think we're going back with our communities. I think we go back, first of all, to remember. So putting on services to remember. We remember those we have lost, and you know, and the fact that loads of people cannot have funerals at this moment in time. So we remember those we've lost, but we also remember those who've done acts of kindness for us. So we remember those who, like our doctors, our nurses, our hospital workers, and we encourage those key workers to come in their uniforms, supermarket workers. And one more time, we're going to clap for the carers in our churches, and we're going to invite our communities. And this time the carers are going to hear us clapping for them. And so church becomes the center of a clap for the carers, you know, kind of, if it's not a final clap for the carers, but a recognition of all that they've done for us. So we remember those who've lost, and we remember those who've done acts of kindness for us. But we also reflect. We need to reflect on how we're going to live our lives differently from this moment on. So churches should start thinking about what's the liturgy of reflection, you know, what's the liturgy of remembrance, but also what courses are we going to put on so our community can reflect. You know, for many people in the conversations that we're having with them, they're saying, I don't want to go back to what I was doing before. Life was just too busy. You know, this has been an opportunity to really reflect on their lives. So how can we as Methodists help people to reflect? And then the final thing is to rejoice. We need to come back to rejoice. There will be lamenting, definitely. There'll be definitely lamenting, but we need to rejoice. And can you imagine, you know, us singing the song which has captured the heart of the nation? I don't know what that song is going to be yet, but it could be, you know, We'll Meet Again, or Lean on Me, or, you know, I'm a Manchester United fan, and what I'm about to say now is just horrific. And just imagine the sacrifice in what I'm about to say now. If it's You'll Never Walk Alone, so be it. But can you imagine as Methodists to say we are going as the final, you know, act, you know, of worship, to sing this song together as a community and get church back as center of the community again. So I think that's the far vision, Richard.
Thanks, Michael. Well, when we were talking about this interview a couple of weeks ago, it was before the Prime Minister had sort of announced the sequence of steps by which people might get back to, well, what people are calling the new normal now. And I guess one of the things that's happened since is, I mean, I've had a number of things across my desk which have been about churches wanting to rush to be open on July the 4th, and to go back as quickly as possible to how things were before. And of course, we've had to say, actually, you know, it's going to be a lot longer period before we can approach anything like normality again, whatever normality looks like. And I just wonder whether actually that presents us with a golden opportunity, really, to prepare for a new normal, whatever that looks like. And I just wonder how you imagine we as churches might begin to prepare ourselves for what is happening.
Yeah, great question, Richard. I think we are definitely going into a mixed economy. of physical and virtual church, you know, kind of for the foreseeable future. And why not, you know, go into a kind of a mixed economy? Because certainly with social distancing, we won't be able to have the numbers that we would normally have. But what, you know, virtual church has brought us so many kind of advantages. You know, kind of many churches are reporting numbers are up at their virtual services, that people have been able to connect in a way with church. And so therefore, why would we want to kind of lose some of those things? So I can see us for some time, you know, having a mixture of both. But I think also there has to be a near vision going on. So there's a far vision as to where we're kind of going to go. And in between the near and the far vision, we're going to have this staged approach of physical and virtual. But the question I think is for us is, you know, how can we be in mission when we're in lockdown? How can we possibly be in mission when we're in lockdown? And I think there is an incredibly fantastic way of being in mission when we're in lockdown. Never has the church, perhaps even your church, has as many volunteers as it has right at this moment in time. With so many people being furloughed, so many people not able to kind of go to work in the way that they would normally do, we've got a lot of more, shall we say, free time. Not everybody, but there is some more free time, more capacity. So the question is what do we do with that time? And I'm trying to get 100,000 Christians to pray each day the following prayer: Lord, today, who do you want me to connect with out with of the church? So Lord, today, who do you want me to connect with out with of the church? And this is the kind of the beginning of a kind of a process that I'm calling ACORN. It is a method of keeping a locked down church on mission. Please note, I am an Anglican bringing a method. Does that sound familiar? Anyway, no, let's leave that there. Anyway, so ACORN, I'm using this word ACORN as a mnemonic, as a way to help us remember the method of keeping a lockdown church on mission. So ACORN is also, of course, what an oak tree comes from. And you can only get an oak tree if an acorn buries itself in the ground. In Christianity, there must be a burial. Even today, there must be a burial before there's the possibility of a resurrection. You know, our fears, our worries, our concerns will be buried as we kind of reach out to another person. And as we reach out to another person, that burial, that planting of the seeds may well bring forth such a surprise as we make those connections with people. So the A of the ACORN is we ask God, is there somebody God is nudging us to connect with? And I'm trying to get 100,000 Christians to pray that daily prayer. And then we hear the call of God, which is the C of the ACORN is call. We hear the call of God. And frankly, you know, kind of when we ask God, the name might jump into our mind straight away. Frankly, the name might not jump into our mind straight away. It might be when we're on our walk, or we're going shopping, or we're doing something else, and all of a sudden the name pops into our mind, and we generally will say to God, oh no, not that person, give me another. So I think that's generally speaking how this kind of works, this call bit. But we ask God and we hear the call. Now, my minister, he says, Michael, it doesn't work like that for me. He says, every day I get my phone out and I scroll through my contact list and seeing what catches my eye as I go through my contact list. So, Lord, look, it's horses for courses. You know, whatever kind of works for you, go for it. But Lord, today, who do you want me to connect with, out with of the church? The third part of the process is obey. And what do you do when you've got the name of somebody? Well, what you do is you pick up the phone, you pick up your video technology, and you give the person a ring. You call the person, you Zoom the person, and you simply say to them, "How are you?" I'll spell that for you. HOW. I'm joking, by the way. Anyway, how are you? I'm really sorry that this is not, intellectually difficult. You see, Jesus was a great question asker. He was a corking question asker. This is more woman at the well than it is other things. I think one of the futures of by the way, I'm going to use a very difficult word now for everybody. One of the futures of evangelism is everybody okay? Nobody needs, there's no heart attacks are going on now, is there? No. The future of evangelism is good question asking, I think. Jesus was a corker as a question asker. How are you? And not just at the food level, because if you've got some food problems, we're Methodists, we'll sort that out for you. Not at the medicine level, because if you've got medicine problems, no problem, we'll get that sorted out for you. No. How are you? And what we'll find is God is in the anxiety. God will be in the worry. God will be in the concern. This is based on the work of a missiologist called Vincent Donovan, who wrote a book called Christianity Rediscovered. And he said, we make the mistake as Christians of thinking we're taking God with us into any given situation. God is already there. Our job is to find out what God is doing and join God in that conversation. So if I was doing this with children or with teenagers, I would suggest to them, this is your opportunity to be a God detective. If I'm doing this to adults, I would say, this is Missio Dei. Try to find what God is doing. God will be somewhere revealed in the ache in their story, in the hurt in their story. God will be revealed somewhere there. And then our job is to try and kind of find the fingerprints of God and join God in that conversation. So it's just being a great question asker, being really curious. How are you? That's the obey bit of the process. Richard, there's another two parts of the process, but I'll pause there for a moment.
Yeah, maybe before I kind of ask a final question, I think it's a story I've told you before, Michael, about being at Spring Harvest a number of years ago, and we were asked to kind of scroll through our phones and to identify somebody who we felt God was calling us to pray for, and then just to text that person. And I scrolled down to my best man, who left the church 25 plus years ago, and felt that God was calling me to just text him. So I just texted him to say I was at Spring Harvest and I was thinking of him and just wanted him to know. And he texted me back immediately to say, you don't know how much this means to me. I'm just burying my mother's ashes at that moment. So there's this wonderful sense that actually God is already at work. And the only thing that holds us back, I guess, is our fear of actually just stepping, even a small step into that kind of reality with some really quite simple human connections. But Michael, I wonder if you could kind of maybe tell us about the R and the N, because I know there's elements of kind of mentoring and formation in this mnemonic that you've developed.
Yeah, and let me kind of, before I do the RNN, just comment on this fear idea, which Richard just kind of helpfully highlighted for us. Because I think, one of the issues that we as modern Christians have got to get our heads around is that when God called most of the Bible characters to do something in the Bible, their first reaction was often fear. The first reaction was often fear. In fact, I'm struggling, to kind of work out which of the Bible characters didn't display fear. Even the Apostle Paul, who's kind of a type A, personality, said, "I came to you in fear and trembling." Fear seems to be all over, the Bible stories. Yet we're being told that you're not supposed to be afraid. I want to give us a more nuanced approach to this, because this is one of the things which holds us back in doing things for God. I think it's okay, to feel afraid. I think it's absolutely fine to feel afraid. I just don't think it's okay to be afraid. I think there's a difference between feeling and being. God, after all, has given us a stress response. Of course we're going to feel afraid. We wouldn't be human if we didn't feel afraid, but we mustn't let the fear stop us doing that which God is calling us to do. And in this process, there will be fear. There will be fear. Now, you might describe it as concern or anxiety. I'm just slightly anxious, Michael. I'm slightly worried. It's fear. You see, Jesus understood this. When he sent the 12 or the 70, can't quite remember which one it was, his motivational speech in sending out the 12 or the 70 was this: "Go, I send you forth as lambs among wolves." It's a corker. Why not have that as your district motto for the next kind of year? Yeah, see how you get on with that one. Go, I send you forth as lambs among wolves. I mean, Jesus knew we were going to feel afraid. Blooming heck. I think God is one of the greatest stressors. You look at all of those stories in the Bible. God sends Abram, to, you're going to be the father of nations, and off he steps in great faith. Within the same chapter, he's giving his wife to Pharaoh. Unbelievable, kind of scared to death. Yet God seems to use people like you and I, who at times feel afraid. It's okay. It's okay. So, Richard, thank you for just noting that fear piece. And so let's move to the final bits of ACORN, which are, the R is report. We report. Now, the reason I'm saying we report is because the old-fashioned word that I would use if it's spelled ACORN is testimony. We have lost testimony out of the life of the church. The best sort of testimony we do at the moment, apparently, is, we get somebody with a proper testimony, like not like our testimonies. Our testimonies don't count, do they? No, we've got to get somebody with a proper testimony, which goes a bit like this. "Oh yeah, I was in a prison cell 25 years ago. There was a flash of light. My tattoos fell off. My chains were free." Anyway, I think that was Wesley somewhere online. Anyway, stop messing around with that sort of testimony. Proper testimony, proper reporting. What did God do yesterday afternoon? What did God do this morning? We report. And we're interested in this process, in what is God doing in us as well as through us. And so we report. Really important that we report. And of course, you will notice, kind of in the beginning of Methodism, there was a reporting system. It was called the class system, and honestly, we've got to kind of get a little bit, just a tiny little bit of accountability back to help us in our Christian formation, just a tiny little bit. The fifth area is N, which is notice. Notice God. So when we're reporting, we are trying to notice what God is doing in us as well as through us. And we use the process not only as reaching our neighbor, but also in God reaching us as well. So it's both evangelism and also discipleship coming together. But before I hand back to Richard, let me just say this. We definitely have to think differently about all of this. I want to say success is one person connecting with one person as nudged by God. Please note what I didn't say. I didn't say success is one person inviting one person and that person saying yes, or committing their life to Christ, or becoming a Methodist. Shock horror. You know, success is just the connection. Leave the result to God. Second thing to think is we must be as interested in what is going on in us as well as through us. And the final thing is that God is leading mission. This is not our mission. It's God's mission. And why would I say that? Well, because Jesus said, I only do what I see my Father do. ACORN, Richard.
Thank you, Michael. That's great. I'm going to hand back to Helle now, because I think we're going to take an opportunity to pick up some questions.
Thank you. Thank you both. It's been very interesting to listen to this. There is a starter question on the chat. I think it's a question, but I think it's a statement. I will read it out. It says, Richard mentioned the July 4th start. The majority of most churches are in the vulnerable group, or key workers, or spouses of key workers, so have to isolate. Coronavirus is still around. Vulnerable people hardly seem to be mentioned in any conversations these days. These people will be seen more vulnerable when the lockdown lessens. Churches need to realize this vulnerability. Great emphasis on virtual churches, ? Do you want to comment?
Shall I go first, and then maybe Michael might have some things to say? I've been part of a group for the last few weeks of Northeast ecumenical leaders, and we kind of meet together on a weekly basis to pray online, of course. And each week we get a report back from the Bishop of Durham, who's part of what's called the Bishop's Gold Group, which is a group of senior bishops in the Church of England who get a briefing from number 10 each week. And the news over the weeks has moved significantly. So at one point, for example, we were planning for what would we do if there had to be mass burials. Thank God we didn't get to that stage, but that was some real planning that was going on in the background. Then we had kind of news that actually the effects of the virus would impact upon the nation for something like 10 years. And then the better news the week after was that actually we were looking at something like 2 to 5 years of recovery. Now, I think actually that's probably what we are looking at as a nation. You know, there was some speculation at the beginning that the economy, for example, would have a V-shaped return. It would suddenly bounce back as people went back to work. I think most people think that's unrealistic now, that actually if we are going to recover, it'll be more of a kind of U-shaped recovery that will take time. And the same is going to be true for the life of our churches as well. So in fact, July the 4th is a date when we might start to think about opening our doors. I don't imagine that actually, if we're in a space where people are going to have to continue to social distance, where we might be wearing masks, where we won't be able to sing at first because of the impact of singing and the spreading of the virus, that actually there's going to be a rush back into physical buildings. there will be some churches that open, and those congregations meeting physically will be small at first, and it will take time, I think, both for the kind of wider impact of the virus to have lessened to the extent where we can feel safe enough to be able to use our buildings, but also actually where people feel confident enough to be able to come back in. Now, you can see that as a threat or as an opportunity. I think one of the wonderful things of the past few weeks, and nobody would have wanted these circumstances to have happened, but one of the wonderful things that has come out of it has been the creativity of our churches in the ways in which we're now engaging with our communities. And I think I would say that the mixed economy is here to stay. And in fact, actually, that's perhaps where we should have been anyway. This kind of experience has perhaps kind of forced our hand and made us grow into that much more quickly. I do hope and pray for the time when we can all be together, because actually Christian faith is, physical gathering and being present to one another is a very important aspect of our faith. But I do think actually we need to start modelling the mixed economy church. Just bringing up the kind of point about vulnerability, I think we've also learned, I think, through the pastoral networks that have developed, new ways of engaging with people who actually were vulnerable before we became aware of our own vulnerability. So actually, there have been people who've been coping with loneliness for months, even years, who now we're learning ways of connecting with. And I think actually we ought to build on that, because actually it's our way of kind of connecting with the wider body of Christ that isn't able to physically meet. And maybe just kind of finally on this question of vulnerability, maybe we're learning as well about the need for the whole of our church life to be more vulnerable and open. Perhaps there's a learning in that as well, actually. There's a lot that we need to kind of learn about how we can listen to our communities, for instance, which means making ourselves vulnerable and not assuming that we have all the answers, but putting ourselves in that space where we can really listen authentically to people, so we can journey with them, because we believe we've got gifts to share and give. So that would be my response.
I guess for me, it reminds me of the Latin word from which vulnerability comes, which is vulnus, which is wound. And there were lots of wounded people out in our community, out with the church before now. It didn't need this crisis, to identify the fact that there were people out there who were vulnerable. In fact, many people in our society have moved from being invulnerable to vulnerable. And so that's why I think, loving our neighbour has never been, of greater import in our generation, at least, because there are so many people out there who I think God is directing us towards, is what my response would be.
Thank you. I have a question here, kind of came to me while I was listening to this. I would like to say, where would you begin in terms of what we say with words when you connect with somebody? You said you start with how are you, but what else is there that we can say? How can we carry on that conversation beyond how are you, and the response will be I'm fine, thank you, or that's kind of the usual response, but there are people who wonder what can be said next.
Yeah, I tell you, this is a big learning curve for us who like to do a lot of talking. A massive learning curve. I call this form of mission introverts heaven. This is introverts heaven. Introverts are really, really good at asking questions and keeping stum, because don't want to do any talking whatsoever. And so the development of being curious about people and not having to fill the silence, that sometimes comes kind of with words, is a is a kind of a gift to develop. You know, it's going to be hard for some of us, but all I would say is that Jesus was a good question asker. You know, kind of rabbis very often answer a question with a question, and there's nothing wrong, I think, in developing, you know, that ability. And really, if we're interested in people, if we're really truly interested in people, we're listening to what they're saying, and hopefully another question should emerge if we're really interested in people.
My reflection would be that there's a danger in thinking that evangelism is just simply a set of techniques, and if we sort of you know, we do the right things in the right order, then surely, you know, somebody will come to Christ, and maybe eventually they'll end up coming to church as well. And but it's not. I mean, its root is just simply good news. I mean, that's what evangelism is about. It's about sharing the good news of the evangel. You know, of sharing the good news of Christ. And I think it has to kind of move from that place. It's a kind of acceptance that what we've been given is a gift, and a gift is something that is to be shared. A gift is something that we want to invite others to share in. And also, I think there's a danger in thinking that what we have to do is go armed with all the right words. You know, we have to have all the right kind of churchy speak to say. I think actually what is most fundamental is about being present to the moment and present to the person that you're engaging with, and listening in two directions. So one, kind of listening intently to the person that you're with, and the other kind of listening intently to what the Spirit is guiding you towards. I'll give maybe an example from a different context. All Methodist ministers soon will have to be in supervision. And one of the things that you notice as you're working through supervision is, you know, you might learn some kind of techniques and ways of working, but actually fundamentally you actually have to be in the moment, and you listen to somebody, and the response you might have is, I think I'm hearing, or I'm wondering, or what I'm feeling in my body is, and those kind of responses, and you're testing those things out with the person that you're talking to. So I think actually it's really important to notice what is going on in the moment, both in your relationship with the person and what the Spirit is saying to you, because actually the Spirit is binding together your conversations. It's not about having all the kind of right words in the right place.
Thank you both. There is still an opportunity to add your questions to chat, if you would like to do that. I have one final question from my end. Michael, you were saying in your bit about uniform. So those people who wear uniform have come to the forefront and seem to be the ones that we depend on. So this is just to tease you really, but what is our uniform as a Christian?
Wow, what a great question. I don't think I've had that question before. And, you know, perhaps kind of all Methodists should sign up for the Salvation Army if you really kind of want a proper uniform there. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think one of the things, you know, kind of that I want to say is our uniform is Christ in you, the hope of glory. You know, it does say clothe yourself, and you know, there's something about having the courage and having the bravery to go in the name of Christ, who's sending you. You know, not knowing, you know, 100% what's going to go on there, but you know, we are Christ's ambassadors. You know, we just are, and live in that. You know, kind of that actually we have been chosen. You know, from the beginning of the before the universe began. You know, so there are so many ways in which we can clothe ourselves. Sometimes we clothe ourselves in, oh, we're not relevant, which is ridiculous. It's an absolutely ridiculous kind of thought. My goodness, Christianity holds so many of the keys to the problems that people have. and they are to be, you know, kind of discovered. So I would say that is our uniform. But great question, my goodness, never asked that.
Thank you, Michael. Has anybody else got any questions they would like to ask?
I would like to ask a question, but I can't work out how to write it down. So can I just ask my question?
Of course you can. Go.
It's really a question, and where is the Methodist Church looking to expand their ability to use technology? In our church, which is Sedgefield Methodist Church, we actually do have the technology to do certain things, but it's been a real battle to get there because nobody knows what's going on. No courses, no, and I think this is an opportunity for people who want to move forward with this type of technology. But I want to see what the Darlington district particularly would like to do to enable us all to move forward in this. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a big question, particularly as it's kind of asked before I've even had a chance to speak to the district policy committee about it. That's a dangerous thing for a Methodist to do. I mean, the first thing I'd note, I think, is that if you'd asked that question back in February, I would imagine that we would have taken several years to get to this point, because we'd have had to go through all our kind of normal kind of committee structures and say, what about this, what about that? In practice, the lockdown has forced several years of change into a few weeks, and we've all learned from that experience. And I think somehow we need to kind of crystallise what it is that we've learned during that period. If you were kind of asking more broadly about actually what we ought to do and could do, the first thing I'd say is that we've been meeting weekly with superintendents, and that's one of the questions that's been asked. But I think I want to kind of set it in the context of a Methodist way of life. So one of the things that was coming to the conference is going to be different now this year, was about a Methodist way of life. How can we live out our calling in the world today? And it's a recall, I guess, to some of the core DNA of Methodism, about living out scriptural holiness. So, you know, in the purposes of God, the Deed of Union says the Methodist Church was called to live out scriptural holiness in the land. Now, there's lots of different ways of thinking about what that might mean, but it is something that's about intentional discipleship that's lived out daily, weekly, monthly, across the life of a year, and not just in our Sunday experience. And that we need to do that in a way that is about our practices of worship, our practices of learning and caring, our practices of service and justice, our practices of evangelism. And I think the digital world offers us some real resources for doing that. First of all, because actually there are lots of resources out there which actually we don't need to replicate. So, you know, there's lots of really good live streamed worship that's already available from Methodist and other sources. But there are some things that we may well be able to do more locally. By that I mean within the district itself, that will support what's going on in circuits. So, for example, Bishop Auckland Circuit is supporting a daily devotional service, which is available both online and by phone. We have an online radio station at Stokesley, which the district grants have been supporting. Other ways in which we can bring those things together. We have a number of kind of, digital groups that are formed quite naturally around kind of Facebook and Instagram and so on. So I think we're just at the kind of beginnings of that in terms of actually distilling what the learning is and starting to get feedback from circuits about actually what will be needed as we come out of this, and how can we bring our resources together in order to make sure that we're not all overwhelmed or all doing the same things, but actually able to access things that will support us So that's a bit of an introductory answer to what I think will be a kind of longer term process. But I hope that gives you a sense of some beginnings with that. And I'd be grateful for any reflections that you have to be sent in to me or to Penny Bissell as the Synod Secretary about what you think would be of help to you as we sort of develop this.
Thank you very much.
Yes, I was going to say that as a district, we're working on finding out what sort of resources we have in a district in all of the churches, and then how we pull all that together as well. So it is in conversation. It's just taking some time. There's a question on a chat that says, how can we as Christians be distinctive in offering caring when there are so many others who are doing so much in the community and often a better job than the churches?
I think kind of there's no doubt about it. Kind of a Christian ethos is within lots of organisations and people in this land, and I think essentially what we've got to offer is not just loving our neighbour, but loving God as well. Kind of some of the things that we sometimes deal with people is just the symptom of a deeper problem, and our kind of joy is to join in mission with God, not just at solving the symptom issue, but actually kind of going much deeper into the kind of the challenges that people have. So I think that's our distinctiveness, is that we know there's something else going on just under the surface, but that's not to downplay anybody else's kind of caring, because I think the Christian ethos has got into lots of organisations out there.
Thank you.
I guess my response is, first of all, I think we need to rejoice in those kind of aspects of our world that actually reflect the gospel. So, whether it's in health services or social services or whatever it is, actually there's much in our world that already reflects the gospel, and we should rejoice in that. And we need to continue to pray, actually, for people who are engaged in our world in that way, and not just Christians engaged in that world. We should pray just openly for people engaged in that world. But I think we need to kind of recognise as well that actually, in our churches, whilst we love our neighbours in very practical ways, we are not social services. What we are offering to the world is a vision of how the world might be in God, because the world belongs to God. So that's something other, I think, is the really striking thing. Actually, we are saying that the world can be different from how it seems, and we lay that dream before it. So, an obvious example of that, a well-known one, is of Martin Luther King, when he makes the "I Have a Dream" speech. He's wanting to see change in the world in which he lives, and he does that by actually placing that world within the framework of a world which is a better world than the one that we live in. So I think we have to say something actually fundamental about a bigger picture within which people live. The world belongs to God, and God's promises of a kingdom that is greater than the world that we experience now. And everything we do that is good is a sign of that, and is something that is working towards that.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? Well, we're near the end of our time. I want to say a huge thank you to Richard and Michael for turning up. Otherwise, this would not be a webinar. And I want to say thank you to everybody for contributing. I have created a little poll which should come to your screen. It's an opportunity for you to feedback. If you want to say more about in words in your feedback, then you can do so in the chat. But other than that, this concludes our session this afternoon.